Firms in the civil engineering world are growing pretty quickly today. Some of them are growing aggressively through mergers and acquisitions. Others are focusing more on organic growth, which may be more sustainable depending on your approach. Well, in today's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me John Camp. John is the president and COO of C&S Companies. And John's going to talk about C&S's approach to organic growth. And he's also going to talk about something that they offer as an organization that many civil organizations don't offer, which is construction services. Before we jump in with John, a word from our sponsor, Pennoni. Since Pennoni's founding more than 5 decades ago, their clients trust Pennoni's commitment to elevating the impact of projects in the communities they serve. By partnering with their clients, they establish relationships that create trust and longevity. Pennoni approaches the start of every project as the beginning of a collaboration. With the rapid change in technology, Pennoni's clients know they are getting innovative methods in delivering quality services for smart, sustainable, and resilient solutions. Pennoni is relentless in their aim to bring fresh perspective and new technologies. Pennoni measures achievement in innovation, efficiency, and excellence. Its milestones are bigger than any one project, and every project affects the community, no matter how large or small. For more information, visit Pennoni.com. That's Pennoni.com. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Today I'm talking with John Camp. John is a licensed professional engineer, president and COO at C&S Companies. John, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO Show. Thanks for taking the time.
You bet, Anthony. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So, John, let's just start off by telling us about C&S. Where are you located? What do you do? How many employees roughly?
Sure. So C&S was founded in 1968 by a couple of folks that splintered off from another company here in Syracuse, New York. That's where we were founded, kind of on the leading edge of Clean Water Act money. So we weren't one of those firms that sprung up out of that, but we're a little bit ahead of that. Started off as a municipal engineering firm. One of our first clients was the county that we're in now. And we slowly grew over time. Probably at some point this year, we're going to pass the 600 person mark. We now have offices in about 20 different places, scattered across the country, several in New York, but we splintered out into various locations. We're a full service company. We used to say, some of the old timers, I guess by now, used to say we do everything but nuclear. But we had to stop saying that at one point because we had some staff that would actually sit in the office of a nuclear power plant and help them with project management. So, yeah, we pretty much do everything, everything you think of, including construction.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to dive into a little bit later because I think that is something that's very unique to C&S, the ability to offer the engineering and the construction aspect of it. So we will go there. But before we do that, let's talk about you a little bit in terms of your career journey. Did you have a goal of always becoming kind of a high level leader in the company, or, talk about how you got to where you are today?
No, that was never my goal. As a matter of fact, when I went into college right out of high school, I was actually into computer science for a couple of years. Eventually figured out it was a better fit for me to get into engineering, so I made that switch. And then in the middle of that, the rest of my college career, I decided to take a break. Moved to Colorado and snowboarded for a few years and hung out with friends. And finally came back and finished my undergraduate degree 9 years after I started it.
Wow.
So my parents were very happy when I decided I was going to finally go back to school and finish. Then after that, I wasn't quite ready to jump into the professional world. I stayed another couple of years and got a master's degree. And then I started at C&S. Story I like to tell, which I think is mostly true, is that I'm one of the last people that actually answered an ad in the newspaper to get a job here, because after that, I was in the time frame of switching into all the internet-based stuff that we use today. So to get to your question, Anthony, I started out as the bottom rung engineer level, worked on technical stuff, mostly water resources stuff in my case, and I was really excited about doing technical work. It got me jazzed up, and I'd have my annual review with my then supervisor mentor. I would tell him, I say, Doug, all I want to do is technical work. Just we're going to keep building it. I'm going to keep doing better stuff, and we're just going to keep going. He would kind of laugh and smile, but he never told me, to his credit, no, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to work into some other path. He let me go, right? And by the time I got maybe say 10 years into my career, and I had started to do some work at a pretty high technical level, and then I started to get the itch to change trajectory a little bit, and then I started to steer myself a little bit toward more management of projects. Then that turned into management of people, and then the business management element kind of crept in there eventually. And fast forward a few more years, and here I am, not doing any technical work hardly anymore. So always a lot of credit to my previous mentors that allowed me to figure that out for myself, rather than trying to put their thumb on me and tell me exactly what I should be trying to do.
Yeah, I think that that's always a very interesting transition in one's career, that kind of fork in the road that comes often for technical professionals of, do I want to further develop my technical knowledge and expertise, or do I really want to start to get into some of these management skill sets, whether it's people leadership, project management, a combination of them? So when that happened for you, I'm just curious as to, was it something that you like started doing? You said, wow, this is something I like, I'm good at it. Like, how did the whole transition happen for you where you said, you know what, I think I could do this management stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the short answer is that it wasn't a finite point in time where that happened. It happened really gradually, probably just in the course of project work, and then at some point I probably got invited to some kind of internal committee meeting, um, that had to do more with the management side, whether it's projects, people, or even part of the business. And it just kind of gradually all started to blend. And we as a company, we try to be pretty intentional about allowing people to do that, right? Not necessarily having to choose a technical track versus a management track. We have both of those things on our, in our organizational charts and our career paths, but we try really hard to allow people to move back and forth or occupy a place in the middle, depending on how you want to look at that. Because there's power there, right? Not only from a workload perspective, but from a development of people as individuals perspective, right? Allow them to let their experience, point them in the direction that's best for them. Because right, if they're working in the best place for them, obviously it's going to be the best place for us as a company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if someone's doing what they really like to be doing, they're probably going to be better at it than if they're doing something they're not all that happy about. So I like to hear that, that personal development aspect of it is a great thing. So all that being said, now that you've been in management and you've been in leadership roles for some time, what do you think your staff would say your management style is? How do you think they describe it if I ask them?
They would probably describe it as loose. I've always operated with a large sense of trust in the people that were working with me, and it's easy to do that when you're at a place where you've got a lot of good people. And I think a lot of the firms that you interact with are probably full of good people, same as us. But man, if I had to work in an environment where the people that were on my team were not pulling hard on the rope, that would be hard for me, because it's more in my nature to let people go, let them figure it out. Certainly be available when questions come up and when problems arise, and dive in when I needed to. But it's not in my nature to micromanage, and I'm thankful for that every day, because that I'm in an environment where I don't have to do that. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think often as technical professionals, we hear people tell us, at some point in your career, you've got to delegate, you've got to give up some of the technical roles and responsibilities if you want to get into management and leadership. But I think to your point, that could be easier said than done if the right team isn't in place, the right processes and systems aren't in place, and you don't have good habits in your organization. So I think that that's something definitely to keep in mind for those of you out there that are making that transition. People may be telling you you have to delegate, but at the same time, there has to be, the team has to be in place and capable and willing and ready to take that tasks on for you to be able to do it successfully.
Right. In a perfect world, as a leader or somebody working in a high level in an organization, in a perfect world, you don't have to reach down into the organization and pull a technical person up and set them in charge of a group of people and tell them that they're not doing any work, any technical work anymore, but now they're going to be managing stuff. Because if that person's not ready for that or don't want to do that, then their inclination is going to be to keep diving back into the work. And right, we don't live in a perfect world, right? There are times when people walk out the door and we have to push somebody up into a position, but um, the genius lies if the timing lines up for that particular person as an individual. If they're ready to take that next step, to move into that new position, that's a beautiful thing when that happens.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something that's come up quite a bit in terms of career progression. From time to time, we work with consulting firms, like helping them look at like career road mapping for their staff and how things are going to, how things might look, giving some visibility to people. And I think the kind of the misnomer in the industry is that if you don't go from technical to management, then you really can't grow in your career. So I think it's nice to hear you say that you don't necessarily have to pull someone from technical into management, because I always tell firms, like, listen, you need technical leaders, right? I mean, this is like what we do. And one of our clients summed it up really well. He said, if you look at a firm in totality, probably the management or leadership may be the few, like not the many, right? When you have so many technical projects going on, you need technical teams of people. So I think that's something to keep in mind for those of you out there. And if you are technical and you like technical, no one's to say that you can't remain and have a long career and really deepen that technical expertise. Just have a conversation with your supervisor, with your company about it, and let them know your desires, because they're going to need that. And I think sometimes we really just make assumptions that our career is going to have a low ceiling if we stay in the technical realm.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Anthony. And again, that's something we try to be intentional about, right? In our career progression documents, we have, like I said before, this management track and also this technical track, and we very intentionally show all the levels as being
Right.
similar levels, right? So if you're, at a high level in the company, you can either be on the technical side or you can be on the management side, but the intent is to try to display them, to celebrate them as equals. Now that's easier said than done, right? It's easy to
Yeah.
draw a chart that shows that. But we've had a few examples where that's worked out really well, right? And what that looks like in practice is, we have a couple of national experts in certain areas. One just happens to be in airport air quality, right, which is a pretty specialized area. But our person here is a well-known expert in that area, and he's well thought of and operates at a high level. And that's, to your point, that's great for us as a company, because that brings us in to a lot of it brings us in a lot of doors related to clients.
Yeah, no, for sure. That reputation, that expertise, that credibility, that's great. All right. So I think one of the things in terms of management and leadership that sometimes people struggle with, or not struggle with, but they just don't realize, is when you take on that role, in addition to all of the leadership responsibilities that come along with it, people are like watching you now, like seeing how you react to things, and that they feed off that energy, so to speak. And obviously over the last couple of years, to say we've had a lot of ups and downs is an understatement, between COVID and the economy and all kinds of stuff that we've dealt with. So my question for you, John, is, knowing that, how do you kind of prevent yourself from either overreacting or underreacting, knowing that, you have an entire company that may be kind of working off of your energy and kind of keeping a pulse on where you're at? How have you approached that?
Well, honestly, Anthony, that's something that I need to work on personally. So it's interesting you brought up the example of COVID, right? Because that's not only is it recent and still fresh in everybody's mind, but that's a classic example of, right, especially early on in observing somebody and how they reacted to that situation. I mean, at that point, I've been here 20 years and I've been working with some people that entire time. And I was surprised at so many individuals' reactions to just the whole idea of COVID, right? If you would have said ahead of time, this is what's going to happen with COVID, and then asked me to predict what this person, and that person is going to do, how they're going to react to it, and how they're generally going to behave after it, I would have got almost all of them wrong, because it was just such a mind shift.
Yeah.
So back to the question about overreacting and underreacting, I wasn't in this leadership position at the time, but I was still relatively high in the company, and I personally underreacted, especially that late February, early March, when it was really starting to become apparent that there was an issue. I just, my natural reaction was that this can't really be happening, right? Everything's gonna be fine, right? This is gonna blow over. It's like, going back a few years, those SARS and a few other those respiratory diseases that never really got hold here. It's just gonna pass on by, and of course it didn't, right? So I got that wrong personally, but I I try not to, I try to be pretty quiet about my reaction to it, and leading into a couple meetings. As a matter of fact, I remember we had to have a discussion. There was a one senior partner who was in Europe right before this
Oh,
meeting. We had to
wow.
have a discussion. Are we going to let this person come to the meeting or not? And I thought my initial reaction in this small group that was talking about it was, yeah, he's been cleared right by the local health agency or whatever. Everything's fine. And I got that wrong. I underreacted. So um,
So it's a learning
so
curve.
my tendency is to underreact, which in most cases is probably better when you're dealing with stuff at a high level, but in some cases it's not.
Yeah. No, I think it's something that everyone has to work on and get used to because I just think the point of it is the reason I always like to bring that up is because I think we can forget that when you're a leader and there's lots of people looking to you, they're really looking to you and how you respond to things that happen like that, because then that affects their attitude and their engagement and how they go forward. So, and I know it's something that we all just need to kind of learn along the way because, you get kind of thrown into leadership and that happens. But I think for those of you out there, just think about when you assume that leadership role. Now you have people that are, yeah, looking up to you for all kinds of stuff, but also just your general reaction to things that happen and the words that you use and the words that you say. And they're going to make moves based on that. They're going to do things, they're going to have attitudes and feelings based on that. So I think it's something definitely to keep in mind as you grow.
Yeah, that, and I think, right, if you're opposite of me and have a tendency to overreact to things, right, that
Yeah.
can be limiting for a lot of people, right? If they're not good at handling bad news when it comes to them, or not able to have a sensitive conversation without becoming, overly active about it, that's going to be limiting for sure.
Yeah. It's like the tip I sometimes give to people that tend to overreact is if you're writing an email, write it, walk away for 5 minutes, come back and reread it before you hit the send button, which is kind of a more bigger analogy to other things that can happen in your career. You want to go have a conversation right away when you hear something, wait 5 minutes, relax, take deep breaths, and then have the conversation. It seems to work out better when you give a little bit of a delay there.
Sounds like you're giving your clients good advice, Anthony.
Yeah, well, it's from personal experience, so that's how that goes. Um, all right, so we talked about COVID, which kind of transitions me into the next thing I wanted to touch base on here. COVID has kind of created this cultural shift in more work from home or work remote jobs. Talk about how this has maybe changed C&S and kind of how you've handled it, and how you're still handling it. We're still in this.
Yeah, so that's a question I think a lot of us are still working through, right? And we probably will be for some time to come. When COVID initially hit, and we all had to go home, we have a great IT department, so we were all set up from a technological perspective to work from home and do well as far as getting actual work done. So initially we thrived because we had enough work and we were just cranking it, right? There were no other distractions. So, some of the initial reactions of people was, oh, working from home is great. We're just going to do this all the time, right? Where everybody's highly utilized, fewer distractions, and we're getting stuff done, and we're able to communicate through Zoom and whatever else, and everything's awesome. As that's evolved over time, of course, things have shifted a little bit. We've settled. I want to say settled. For now, we're operating on a policy where we ask people to be in the office 60% of the time. So obviously, full time people, that's 3 days a week. That's worked reasonably well, right? Most of us feel that some in office time is important as far as relationships and communication and all the stuff that everybody talks about. Um, but it's something that we're still working at. We're working through. In some areas we struggle, right? In some of our we're primarily organized by market focus, and in some of our business units, people are doing well and are highly utilized, in others, and they tend to be others that involve large teams like facilities type work. they tend to have a harder time because they need a lot of coordination. And, you know, even though it's been a few years, we're still, I think, used to face coordination. I think that's still most effective, but we're working through it. I don't see it changing anytime soon, which, I think a lot of people are seeing the same thing. So uh, we've been settled on our 60/40 policy for a while, but that doesn't mean it won't change in the future.
Yeah, and I think what happened for a lot of people, to your point, is when it immediately happened, people were working remotely and people were kind of generally saying, hey, we're much more utilized, we're much more productive. This is great. Why didn't we do this sooner? But then I think as things progressed, you start to recognize some of the things that you don't necessarily see right away, which is the mentoring, the relationship building, the interaction, just the social interaction from other than being home all day, every day. So I do think that there's a lot of benefits of both. And it sounds like something like your firm is doing and other firms I've spoke to where there's a bit of a hybrid experience can be very beneficial. But again, it's like everything else that's been happening lately. It's kind of going to continue to flex and continue to evolve over time. But we have seen at EMI working with our clients that, really the ones that have been the most successful have had a little bit of both, if you will, just because it is nice for people to be able to be remotely from sometimes they're more productive remotely, but it's also great for them to link up with their team face to face, really. And like I said, the mentoring, I mean, that's what I always think about from someone who's so focused on career development for engineering professionals is a lot of times when I talk to leaders and I ask them what made them a great project manager or a great leader, they'll always come back with mentoring, right? Like I had a great mentor. I talked to leaders in my company. And so you kind of start to think like, how is that going to happen if we're not, in the office as much? And that's kind of what I tend to worry about a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, you and I are having this conversation over whatever platform we're on here, and it's works out well, but it's not quite the same, obviously, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's not any brilliant statement. I think people have figured that out. Looking forward, right, I'll be curious to see what this all looks like in say 10 years. A friend of mine who used to work in the tech industry told me a story a few years back that, and I think that the story was kind of based around Northern California, that several of the companies there allowed everybody to work from home. This goes back a long time, like I said, and they did that for a while, but that eventually, over time, people kind of ended up and filtered back into the office because they missed all the office stuff, right? Human connection and uh, um, team building and mentoring and all that stuff. Now, I don't know, right? Obviously, there are a lot of introverts in the engineering industry. We'll see if the result with us is different or not, but it'll be interesting to watch it play out for sure.
Yeah. And, we're having this conversation right now because I met John Trimble, chairman of C&S, at a conference. We met in person, shook his hand. We had a great conversation and talked a little bit about the show, and he connected us. So, so I think the in-person aspect of what we do in our industry is very important. And I hope that it continues to be present and will probably continue to evolve as we move forward here. So, John, I know that C&S is very interested in organic growth. Can you talk a little bit about that and, some of the strategies that you've looked to in terms of organic growth? Because I know that can be a very, a sustainable way to grow.
Yeah, that's a hot topic these days. There's a lot of merger and acquisition activity that goes on these days, right? That's everybody knows that. We actually tried our hand at that, or maybe 10 to 15 years ago, we tried to buy a small, maybe 10 to 15 person land development firm in Orlando, and we got a little bit down the road, maybe 3/4 of a year, and realized that we'd kind of bought a box of smoke. The founder had left at the very as early as he could, based on the agreement, and eventually all the people left. And we to this day we only have one person that's still down there. So it's interesting because it turned from an acquisition type of growth, and then we had to filter people down there, and then it became an organic growth situation. And that took a long time, right? The organic growth takes time. It's only been stable, 10 years in. Once we got past 10 years of that situation, that's finally got to the point where it was really stable and operating smoothly and efficiently. So we have some experience there. Probably the better story to tell, though, is actually where we have expanded most of our regional offices have sprung up around major project wins, where we win a long-term project, often related to aviation in our case, but we can win a long-term project, say in San Diego, right? That's one of our bigger regional offices now. We win a big project there, and we're immediately able to fill an office space with two, three, four, five people. Um, and then as part of getting that initial project done, they develop local connections, start building local work. We start to hire local people, and that is where we've been able to push our organic growth most effectively. That type of scenario, and that's worked reasonably well. It's never the fastest way, but
Right.
when you grow like that, you minimize the chance of cultural clashes. You minimize the chance of mass exodus, right? Like we had when we bought that land development firm. It's slower, but it's stronger.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing. I think mergers and acquisitions can be a great way to grow if it's something that you're good at and you have that process down of being able to integrate these other firms into yours, which is a very complex process. And I think it's one of those things where it's like if it works, you can grow faster, but for it to work, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 things have to happen right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like the risk factor there is a lot higher than maybe taking an approach like you mentioned, where you focus on a geographic region, you win a big project. It just comes down to, one will be faster probably than the other if you can get it to fly. And there's that if factor there. So, I think that organic approach is good. And I think I go back to a recent episode where I interviewed Gil Hanch, who's the CEO at MSA, and he said, we slowed down a little bit. We wanted to build the firm with bricks, not with sticks, right? And I think that kind of stuck with me, that saying. And I think it's the same applies here with the, M&A versus the kind of organic growth. It's like, you could build it a little faster. It'll be maybe a little bit risky, but you can give it a shot. So it's interesting to hear that, and I'm happy to hear you share some of your experiences just to get a feel for that.
Yeah, I think right. You can hear the. I mean, M&A is great, right? If we were good at it, there's a good chance we'd be doing at it. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we all know people who work for a smaller firm that have been bought by a bigger firm, and some people are happy after that transition that transaction. Some the people that used to work for the smaller firm, but there's a lot of them that aren't, right?
Oh yeah.
They were more happy when they were self-controlled, when they didn't have to push things further up a chain of command. It's that to me, that's telling to me, right? If the people getting acquired are not as happy as they were before, that points out the biggest weakness to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think it's like one of those things where it's not as straightforward as saying, we're good at M&A or we're not. Because to me, to be good at it, you have to do good at so many different things, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like 1% of, or no, not 1%, point something, something, something percent of like baseball players in the world are in the major leagues because you have to do like a million things right to make that happen. So, if you're listening out there and you're like, hey, my firm's not good at it, well, I think you're probably in the majority. You're not in the minority in terms of like firms that are good at M&A, which is why I always like the idea of organic growth. John gave a great example. Other things that you could do in terms of organic growth is having a really great internship program, right? And building people up and hiring young and training them and, intending and keeping people long term. And I also like the idea of, having a really good management and leadership development program, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be developing your team members. There's the saying, people don't quit companies, they quit managers. So you need to develop your people so they could develop the next generation. And that can really help you with organic growth. But again, it takes time, it takes investment, it's slower. But I think you have to see it and focus on it now to be able to do it for the long term. So
Right. And one of the reasons, one of the big reasons we're able to allow ourselves to grow slowly is that we're not beholden to any investment companies. We're entirely self-controlled, so we're in control of our own destiny, and so we get to choose our own path through that, which means a lot to us.
yeah, for sure. So, John, one of the things that really differentiates C&S in regards to civil engineering firms is that you offer construction through one of your companies. Can you speak to the kind of the success that C&S has experienced as a result of this and just how this looks in terms of your organization?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Anthony. Yeah, and our construction company is probably very close to 20 years old now. It's been a slow development. There's been lots of hiccups along the way, but we've gotten to a point within the last few years where they're really strong and being really successful. And we figured out ways to tie together our teams. Right, the engineering side works with the construction side for a lot of projects. We're in New York State. Our headquarters in New York State, where our biggest part of our construction company is, and in New York State, if we design something, we've made a decision that our construction company won't bid on it, which is harder, which makes it harder for our construction company to do public work. But where our construction company shines is with private industry, where we can put a turnkey option in front of clients. Say, look, we can come in here, we can open book the whole process. We'll design it, and then we'll either do self-perform work or take bids from subcontractors and show you their bids, and we'll put a small markup on it, but we push through that way. And we have a few different turnkey options that we can offer our clients like that. And where there's trust already, right? If they're a long-term client, especially, that's a great way to get a project done. It saves on time, and process, and we almost always end up with a better product that way.
And that would be a design build approach, right, John?
Yeah. So we push for that where we can with clients that allow. Our construction companies do standalone work. Sometimes it's even public work, and it's often designed by others, where they're in a bid to win situation. We've developed a few different sections of the construction company that specialize in each of those, and that's growing. We see that honestly as our biggest path for potential growth. But we've got a construction entity here in the Syracuse office, and we have another one in our San Diego office, so kind of East Coast, West Coast. And they both focus on a little different things, but they're both developing quickly, and we expect them to be a big part of our business in the future.
That's great. Yeah, and if you're not familiar, the design build is a project delivery process that's been around actually for a while, but it still has it's pretty trendy in terms of hearing a lot about it. Well, because the laws and rules around it continue to evolve. But it can be a very beneficial approach, especially to larger projects, to have a kind of a design build team that handles, like John was saying, kind of a turnkey, handles it from A to Z type of thing. Can make it a lot easier for the owner not to have to deal with multiple entities, which sometimes is tricky when you get to projects of that size, and can kind of save you, I think, a lot of time and a lot of money on projects of that size.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about that is, instead of having a triangle of, right, an owner, an engineer, and a contractor who often pull on each other in different ways, right? If everybody's on the same team with the same goal and no one's fighting each other for extra dollars, that's a great way to get a project done. And it requires trust, mostly between, right, the client, the owner, and us. But when that trust is there, it's a great way to get a project done.
Yeah, for sure. No, it absolutely is. All right, so I got just a couple of last questions here for you, focused mainly around career progression. And this is a question that we get often from professionals or in the industry. What is kind of the number one trait or skill that you feel is important for civil engineering professionals to have today? Or one of the most important that you feel?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll come up with the answer that came to mind first here. And I don't know if it's specific to civil engineering, but if you're focused on creating value, right, in whatever you're doing, if it's a small project and you're working on, say, a grading plan or a water line design for a small part of a bigger project, if you focused on the value that you can provide in that one area, and get that done in an efficient and effective way, that's a building block for a lot of stuff, right? It's our current CEO, Michael, who's actually in our San Diego office, or out of our San Diego office, he likes to focus on call the difference between the we and the me, right? We're focused on we, the larger collective, right? The project in this case, in my little example, right? That's you're gonna create value, right? If you're focused on me, right, what's the best way for me to advance myself? That's going to tend to pull you away from what's building up, you know, goodwill and good results and good relationships in the future. If you focus on the we, you're going to be going in the right direction.
That's great. And I guess a follow-up question to that is, how can a professional in our industry, and again, it may not be, doesn't have to be in this industry either, but how would they understand like how to drive the most value for their firm? Like, sometimes people ask me that question, like, how do I know if I'm driving value? Like how could they get an answer to that question? And so they're trying to figure out how they can just make sure that, like, kind of like goes back to what you said before, like, you want to be giving that value. I guess, like, how do you know that? How do you know if you are? How do you know what that means?
Well, one good way to do that is through effective communication with your supervisor.
Mm.
If you are able to have good conversations with that person and understand where the needs are and be open to criticism and make adjustments, to put yourself in a better position to help the team, that's a great way to do that. Right, you can take that too far. You don't want to be knocking on your supervisor's door every hour and a half to ask them questions about that. But if you have a good supervisor, an effective supervisor, that having open communications with them is a great way to do it. And then I think just generally being available to help, right? It's lots of times a project manager might go to somebody, ask for help, and they say, no, can't, I'm too busy, right? If you're more likely to say yes, that's going to lead you down a path of value pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah. They say your best ability is availability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be that easy. And I think in your like performance review, if you have a performance review, there's nothing wrong with asking, like, am I providing the value that you expect me to provide? What else can I do to be more valuable? Or, asking questions like that can be very, very beneficial. So, John, last question I have for you. In your time as in management and leadership, has there been any specific, whether it have been a course, an author, a book, a philosophy that leaned on, that stuck with you, or has it just been, progression along the way?
I think it's been a little bit of both, right? There's been a lot of just progression along the way, and right in the course of people's careers in our industry, right? You get up to 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different books and authors. And I think almost every book I've read as part of a course or a class or a training program, I've been able to find good information in almost every one of them. I think one of the ones in particular that stuck out to me was Lencioni's The Advantage. That's a relatively straightforward book. It doesn't quite get as much play as I thought it would. But we actually, under a previous CEO before Michael, under John Trimble, we established our strategic plan around that book. And because it was simple, effective, and wasn't overly prescriptive, just the approach. So that's always been high on my list. It's because right, I don't know how well you know John, but he's a pretty straightforward kind of guy, and he's never been a big fan of the business book. So when he brought that to the leadership team and wanted us all to read it, we knew it was going to be a good one, and that one really stuck with us.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I've been getting a lot of mentions of Lencioni's books on this specific show, the Civil Engineering CEO show. So that's interesting. A bunch of different ones actually as well. So, well, listen, John, I want to thank you again. I'm just talking with John Camp here. John's a president and COO at C&S Companies. John, thanks so much for spending some time with us here and for sharing a little bit about C&S and about your journey into leadership. We really appreciate the time.
Happy to do it, Anthony. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with John Camp. I really like the whole conversation around organic growth and also the idea that you can go high in civil organizations with technical expertise. You don't necessarily have to go into management. And if your firm is forcing you to, then maybe you need to find another opportunity. Please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.